Hey everyone, Chris, the Thrift Shop Hustler, with another Reseller After Dark interview. I got the amazing Brandon here from Retro Junk 1987. And Brandon does a lot of great videos about.
I got the amazing.
I did the same thing
Sorry
too.
about that.
That's all good. And so Brandon's here. Retro Junk 1987 is his YouTube name, and I definitely have a link in the description, so definitely go and check his channel out. Tonight we're going to talk about retro games, what to look out for, some tips and tricks. Brandon's brought some stuff for show and tell. We're bringing it back to kindergarten, Brandon, with the show and tell stuff. So Brandon, do you want to introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are and what you're about?
What's going on, guys? I'm Brandon. As he already told you, you can find me over at Retro Junk 1987, both on YouTube and over on Instagram. I am probably more involved with the Instagram. I post all my finds and flips and all sorts of stuff. So I'm very excited to be here and ready to talk some retro games for sure.
Yeah, man. Like I was watching some of your recent hauls, and you had some pretty crazy scores. So we're gonna get into that in just a minute, and we're gonna talk about everything pretty much retro game, what to look out for, what the different things look like, and things like that. So let's get to know a little bit about Brandon for those that are new to the channel and haven't seen his stuff on Instagram. And by the way, I'll put on an Instagram link definitely on the back end for sure, because that's actually where I started to see you and find you, was through Instagram. So
Cool.
we're definitely going to do that. So you want to tell us a little bit about your reselling history, how you got started and all that?
Sure. Well, my main passions are toys and retro games. So, I mean, I still have my original toys from when I was a kid. My mom was great. She even saved boxes, and she would fold them flat and store them in the attic. So I have a lot of cool old stuff, and that's stuff that I won't part with. But I started eBay in like 2010, but before that, I was still setting up at flea markets and doing yard sales and stuff like that. So what I did is took my passion and just did what a lot of people decide to do, and extend that and try to make some money off of those same things that I loved. So I would buy large lots, keep the few items out of it that I needed for my collection, and then resell the rest. And as the years went on, as you can imagine, my hoard ended up getting pretty big. So I had to end up start selling more and more, because A, I didn't have room for it, and B, I really didn't need much more stuff at that point. So that's when the eBay really came into play. Like I said, it was end of 2010 into 2011 when I really started that. And it all started with that big bin of games that I was telling you about before we started.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I was at a yard sale a town away from me. This guy just had pretty much what every tag sale has, a random mix of everything. And then at the end of the row of tables on the ground, there was a Rubbermaid bin. And actually, I don't think he even had it open. It was a bin with a lid, so you'd have to do a little digging. So I opened this bin, and it's filled with Atari and ColecoVision games. And anyone who knows their games even a little bit knows that those games aren't really so sought after, and there aren't too many high-value games. But the good thing about this was every single one of those games in that bin were sealed, brand new. Some of them still had like the plastic hang tags still on them from the retail store or whatever. So on that $50 investment, which those were the first things I ever posted on my eBay account, were those sealed games. And all said and done, once I sold all of them, I was in about $1,600 profit. And the single most valuable game was $600. And that was a World Series of Baseball game.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And you are right. You know, you would think that Atari and ColecoVision, which is another kind of game that came out around that time, would be worth a ton of money because they're kind of older. But it's kind of weird how over the years those games really haven't demanded the money that Nintendo and Sega and PlayStation have demanded. Um, Did you do auctions or did you do buy it now with the games? How did you go about selling those?
The I know the baseball one I definitely auctioned because I had done a little research beforehand, and it was an obscure game, which once again is weird because sports titles usually don't command too high dollar values after the year they were released because the roster is constantly upgraded, the graphics are constantly improved, so a lot of sports games aren't worth much. So I definitely had that one in an auction, and then the majority, the more common ones were buy it nows.
Yeah, that's too funny. And you're totally right. So I guess we can segue into some of the pro tips early on in the show is about sports games. For the most part, I would say like 95% of all sports games are pretty much like bargain bin things, but every once in a while, there's going to be some very high end games that are very sought after. I think there's a couple games for GameCube. I know that there's a couple games for PlayStation 2. There's a couple games that are out there that are sports games, but would you agree for the most part to stay away from sports games?
Yeah, the only time I totally agree. The only time I would even consider buying sports games, and really the only time I get them is when I buy a big lot and they're included. And those are the games that, like, when I set up at the flea market locally, that will go in like a $2 or $3 bin, and you'll sell one or two every week at the flea market.
Right. Those are the probably most common things that you see at the Goodwill, and anyone that's been into any Goodwill in the last 3 or 5 years knows that PlayStation 2 sports games pretty much multiply like rabbits in those kind of situations. So, and what we're also trying to say, and I don't want to knock it, but it's almost like the quick thing, like, oh, it's a sports game, don't care about it. Always look up everything, even if you're not familiar. And the importance of looking up stuff is super important because you never know. You're going to be like, oh, I heard on Chris's channel he said sports games are bad, I'm not going to look at it, but you might be missing that very important game that's rare. So till you get familiar with everything, just understand what we're trying to say is sports games for the most part are not valuable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with looking everything up. Because like you said, there's always that obscure game, and I mean, I've been doing this a while, and there are still things I've come across that I've had to look up. It comes with the territory, and there's always an exception to the rule. So, like you said, that 1 out of 100 sports games could bring in you big money. You just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about retro gaming as basically a collectible niche. I've been I had the first Nintendo on my block in 1985 of Christmas. So I've been a Nintendo fan since I was 5 years old. Like I said, I had the first one on the block, and basically all the kids from the neighborhood would come around. And from what I heard, Christmas of 1985 was really hard to get those. I've never had a conversation with my parents on how they got it or any of that stuff, but Nintendo was one of the first video games that I ever played. And so it has a very special a place in my heart. You were born in 1987, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So your kind of Nintendo system was the Super Nintendo, pretty much. I'm pretty sure you might have had an NES too. What was your kind of history with Nintendo?
Um, well, before I talk Nintendo, my first personal console that I had was a Sega Genesis, and that
Oh,
was
there you
for a
go.
while before I had any Nintendo. My favorite game as a kid was Echo the Dolphin for Sega Genesis. I
Yeah,
played it for
that's a
hours.
classic.
My cousins, two of my cousins, both had the Super Nintendo, so that was really my first experience with Nintendo was staying over at my cousins and staying up all night playing the Super Nintendo. Um, and then my first personal Nintendo console was the N64.
Oh, okay, got you.
And yeah, I got that for Christmas from my grandparents, and then after that is what really got me back into video games, and that's when I started going back and buying the older systems.
Right. That's cool. So you weren't that kid in that YouTube video that opened up that Nintendo 64 for Christmas.
Yeah, I wish. I wish I had a YouTube video of it.
So let's talk about Nintendo games, guys. So basically, the Nintendo NES 1985. This is what the cartridge looked like. Pretty much everyone's familiar with this that has been in reselling. But if you're not familiar, this is what a Nintendo game looks like. It's going to have some screws on the back, and we're going to get into a couple of things also. If you don't have a system, you know, and you have a game and you have a system, you're trying to test it, you can clean the connectors with a Q-tip and some, I think it's called isopropyl. I can't even say it usually. It's like isopropyl alcohol or something like that, 91%. You can clean that off and then try it if it works. This was the very first Nintendo NES game cartridge, I should say. And there's screws in the back, and there's specialty screws that you can open up these things. So if your game's not working, you can actually go and check it to make sure. Another thing about these games is there's some of the rare ones are actually there's counterfeits. So what you do is you can open up the back, look at the boards. They have every single game on Google. If you look up Nintendo NES board, it'll show you the little board. And unfortunately, I didn't bring my screwdriver. I would have undone one of these so you guys can see it. But definitely look that up for sure. So yeah, that's what the Nintendo NES looks like. And that's what the cartridge looks like. There's tons of them out there. I don't know exactly how many games they made, but they did make a bunch of them. This is what the Super Nintendo game looks like. Same situation where it's got the specialty screwdriver on that. This is SimCity. This is probably one of my favorite games ever. That's why I have it here. This is my testing unit for systems here in the shop. You can also clean it also here. And like I said, it has a specialty screwdriver that you can get on eBay or whatever for very cheap. And then also next would be the Nintendo 64. This is what a box looks like. And let me basically pull this game out right here. I'm totally going to ruin this. As a matter of fact, this is this is like the worst one to pick because it's got like extra stuff in it, and the games are usually gray. They don't look like this. So this is what a Nintendo 64 looks like. So this is basically all the cartridges. And then of course GameCube is going to have this is when the disc started. So that's a little bit of show and tell with Nintendo. Brandon, do you want to talk about the Sega CD purchase and about maybe a little bit about the history about Sega CD? Some people might not know about Sega CD, and we can talk about your amazing score.
Yeah, we can go into that. Unfortunately, as far as Sega CD goes, and if you go back to my video on my channel of me going over that haul, I admit in the video that I am not as knowledgeable with the Sega CD because I never had it when I was younger. And I just had another update video that referred to that haul video on something that I completely missed. And a viewer on my channel actually pointed it out to me. So the story is I put out want ads on Facebook and Facebook tag sale groups all the time, listing what I look for and how to contact me. And a woman reached out to me. She's cleaning out her mother's house. It's a couple towns away from me. So I told her what I look for: old toys, old video games. She contacts me back, says she dug out a bunch of stuff from the basement, asked if I wanted to come look at it. So I did. It ended up being a Sega CD console with the Sega Genesis as well, original Nintendo, a Game Boy Color, Game Boy games, a huge bin of Sega CD games, a few sealed toys, just a huge amount of stuff for $150 for everything. So the one thing I passed over in that lot in my video, and someone called me out on it, was this game here. Sorry, there's a bit of a glare. It's called Snatcher for the Sega CD. And what is significant about this is it is in the top, I'd say 2 or 3 most valuable games for the console. This copy is a pristine condition. It still has the little piece of foam they put over to protect it. There's not a scratch on it. The manual's beautiful. This will get, I want to say, a minimum of $700 for this one game. And I had no idea. I was completely oblivious. And I passed right by it when I was doing my haul video.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. If you can actually put that up to the screen and hold it still just for a second, as you can see there, folks, Sega CD, that's what it looks like on the side. It's gonna be in a weird kind of larger CD case, jewel case. Usually those are pretty busted up for sure. Yeah. So the fact that
this is a comparison, that's how big it is compared to a Game Boy. It's pretty big.
Yeah, they're large. And for those that don't know, The Sega CD basically was an attachment that was on the Sega Genesis. So it was almost like they made systems that were basically 2-in-1. They also made one that was a sort of like an attachment to the Sega Genesis, if you had it. And that's the one my brother had. We had the one that was the upgrade one. So you had to buy it on the side and then it hooked up to the Sega. And so we actually had that. And there was a lot of great shooter games in that thing. So here's the thing, folks. We're going to drop some knowledge on you right now. If you find any Sega CD games, you buy them. It's not like if you find a PlayStation 2 game, I don't know. There's going to be some games we're going to talk about in this program that you buy them no matter what. Sega
Yep.
CD is a system of games that you buy no matter what.
That I agree 100%. As is with anything you buy, you obviously want to try to get it for as cheap as possible. But yes, I would always recommend Sega CD games for sure.
Exactly. And another thing too, for those that don't know, they're the same size as a music CD. So if you do come across a collection, a large amount of them that are scratched, you can actually go and on eBay, go to a disc resurfacing service for like $2. You can have them resurfaced. They'll be like brand new. They'll be able to play. So also remember, if you're buying something like that and they're totally scratched to hell, there could possibly be, new life to them if they're not super scratched, like too incredible. And that's, let me just touch on that a little bit also, Brandon, is another good thing is sometimes people sell like lots of CDs of games that are without boxes and they're scratched, and you can basically do some lot sniping like that, pick some games out, have them resurface and then resell them. I've done that a lot with the Wii games, especially Mario Kart is like an easy $15, and usually you'll find that in a collection, and sometimes they're beat up. You spend a couple dollars, you get them resurfaced, and you get a case for it, and that's an easy $20. Have you done any resurfacing or any kind of stuff like that?
It's funny you mentioned that. I have not, but I just called a local retro shop a week or two ago to inquire about resurfacing, and they said if I bring in a good stack of like bulk, it's like $2 a disc. So I'll go through and pick out the ones that I think are worth it and bring them a good chunk. I have not done it yet, but it's funny that you brought it up. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention. So for instance, even if you find this particular title, Snatcher, the valuable one, if disc only, it's still $400. And then if you were to find this sealed, it's over $1,200.
Right. And we can actually kind of segue into the grading aspect of this, because some people might not know you can actually grade video games. Now, if I found a sealed Snatcher, I would definitely spend the $30 or $40 to have it graded, because not only is it a super rare game, finding it sealed is going to be incredible, and having it actually authenticated, because sometimes people will reseal games and actually like make it so that they look brand new, but they're actually just resealed. And huge props and shout out to Nintendo, who kind of thought outside the box originally. Have you ever heard of the T and the H seams on the games?
I'm not super knowledgeable on them. I have heard of them, yes. It's just the different way they sealed the games.
Right. So some of the early Nintendo games will have a seal. It's called the H seal. There's a stream that goes across the side of the back. And what that does is it's basically like a specialty machine that Nintendo had, or manufacturing or whatever, that sealed the games in a certain way, where your normal thing where you'd go and you would kind of seal it yourself, you're not going to achieve that exact seal. So kudos to Nintendo. I didn't do a little bit more research to see if that was actually a security feature that they did, but knowing the Japanese and knowing Nintendo, I'm pretty sure that's exactly why they sealed them in those special ways. So you can look all that kind of stuff up, but grading services is definitely an option. There is sealed games out there. They're still out there. I'm sure there's a warehouse somewhere like the Indiana Jones warehouse, where there's wooden boxes of crates full of Nintendo games out there. But if you do come across these rare games and they're sealed, I would highly suggest spending the $40 in having them professionally graded. Do you have any professionally graded stuff in your collection or no?
I do not have anything graded, and the only sealed game I have is for the N64, and it's Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. It's still it's $100 or so sealed, which is pretty cool. I wouldn't have this graded, at least not yet. If the value suddenly goes up like crazy one day, then yes, but
exactly. That's how for me personally, I wouldn't have something graded unless it was demanding like, $500 plus.
Right.
For sure, because even in the world of grading, they have scales, and I think AFA, which is the action figure one, they go from 80, 85, 95, and 100. There's rarely anything that's 100. Most things are going to be, 95. Another great thing about sealed games is if you might think that a Toys R Us sticker or a KB Toys sticker. KB Toys, huge shout out for those that are old enough to remember KB Toys, dude. Do you remember KB Toys?
Oh, I love KB Toys. KB Toys is where I got my first copy of Pokemon, any Pokemon game, and this is it right here. This is from KB Toys.
Right. So my whole point of that is sealed games with factory are actually toy shop stickers, Toys R Us, KB Toys. That's another way of authenticating a seal too, because not everyone's going to have a vintage, price gun in their collection. So
Yeah.
kind of faking that is another way to kind of determine whether or not your games are legit. Now, this market is actually blown up pretty crazy. As a matter of fact, when I was younger, this was probably 1999, 2000, I actually had a website that was a price guide for Nintendo and Super Nintendo games. I was very heavily into this stuff a long time ago. And unfortunately, I sold my whole collection in 2001 before the market it took off. And I will say the market is super hot right now. A lot of us that are in our 40s and our 30s, the nostalgia comes into play. And I think that's what's really fueling the market right now. Is when I was younger, I thought that Nintendo games are going to be the baseball cards of the future, which we're starting to see that happening exactly right now. So what do you think about the kind of the market right now?
Like you said, it has been blowing up the past couple of years. Certain games, it fluctuates a lot. I'd say some of the games that had better value about 2 or 3 years ago have softened a bit as well. I think that has a lot to do with the cool new little consoles they have coming out, like the NES Classic, the Super NES Classic, that have all the games preloaded onto it. So a lot of people are going with that option because it's cheaper and you don't have to store a bunch of games. But overall, market is super strong, high demand. Another tip that kind of goes with that is more popular titles, especially like almost anything with Mario in it. If you can afford to hold on to it during the holidays, you'll get a nice increase in return on that as well.
Yeah, you actually bring up a really good point about the popular games, like, for regular Nintendo, Super Mario 3, Super Mario 2, the black box original Nintendo. They made millions of those things. But if you can find a graded one that's in amazing condition, though I've seen Super Mario 3 go for $500 plus, graded, sealed. Super Mario 2, 500 plus. I remember a few years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, when I saw a regular Zelda game, the gold cart, sell for over $500, and I thought, wow, that's crazy. But that same thing now is probably worth $1,000, $1,200.
Yeah, it's insane. Like you said, condition is key, and the nicest graded copies are going to bring the most money.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think like, this stuff was readily available, which brings up another good point that I've talked about before in the shop, or in the channel, is right now there's something that's around us that is very there's a lot of that stuff out there that's going to be the next thing. So 10 years from now, it's going to be, oh my God, I can't believe this is worth so much money, but it's right now. So kind of thinking about what that is going to be the hardest thing to do. When I was younger, I knew video games were going to be popular, but I'm an idiot and I sold them all. Thelma Thrift asked, what about the peripherals like the Power Glove or the robot? That's actually a good segue. I think you have Rob the robot. Do you want to do a little show and tell?
I do have a Rob. The Rob's cool. I do have the other parts for it too. There's a bunch of little arms that clip onto here and little weights and balances. And he was used for a game called Gyromite, and he would kind of move and pick up little counters and move them onto different pins. And it's really more of just a cool item. To actually use it it's not that great, to be honest with you. The same with the Power Glove. It underperforms, but it's cool to have and cool to see on a shelf. A nice complete Rob brings in about 120 plus, so it's not bad. But he's not going anywhere. That's my little buddy. He's part of my collection.
Yeah, I remember when you could buy those for like $20 all day long. They weren't really popular. You're right; it was very cool when it came out, but the function here. I'm going to talk, and while you show everyone that, you're totally right about the fact. I love that. I just love the look at that guy, dude. He's just amazing. So he did come with little gyros, that kind of little plastic things that he picks up with his little claws. Do you have any of those, by the way, to show or no?
They're in a bin up
Don't
in
worry,
my
don't worry about it. You can part him out. The little gyro things sell for a couple bucks each. Actually, I haven't even looked at the price on those. I'm sure they're like $10 a piece now, or something like.
I believe they're all blue and yellow are the colors of the gyros. I think so, but
yeah, I think I want to say they're actually red and blue, but I don't even remember. With my old age, you're probably right.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, but honestly, that is a cool thing, and you're right. It was more like a thing that was a novelty thing, though it worked. I had Gyromite as a kid, and I didn't have the robot because that actually had a system that came with that too. And by the way, if you can find systems that are sealed, that's another subject actually we can probably sidetrack into now. Thanks for showing that, Rob. That's actually really cool. Sealed systems go for a crazy amount of money. In the Nintendo 64 days, this system right here, Nintendo 64, they made specialty systems, and so there's some limited edition systems that are worth hundreds of dollars. If you can find a sealed Nintendo 64 system, those go for $300 or $400. Do you have any sealed systems in your collection, or have you ever came across any of that kind of stuff?
Sealed, no. I have a bunch of complete in box stuff, but not sealed.
Yeah, because here's the thing: is a lot of people pretty much open these, and so finding sealed systems, there's a whole subset of collectors that are into having every single game, having every single accessory, having every single sealed system. And Nintendo 64 came out with a pretty good amount of limited edition systems. I think there's a clear orange one. There's a clear green one. Probably the most notable one that I can remember is a solid gold one that was, it wasn't solid real gold, but it was painted chrome gold, and it was a Toys R Us exclusive. So that's another thing about systems, is knowing what kind of systems are out there. Of course, the standard black Nintendo 64, that's the common one. But if you come across a see-through green one or that gold one, knowing what that kind of stuff might add to a value of something that someone wants $50 for a whole collection, and you're like, oh, that seems a lot. But the system alone could be $300 or $400.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I've had lots where I've spent $500, but it was like $3,000 worth of gaming items, like whole collections. And it's crazy how deep you can get with this stuff. Like, for example, I paid $80. It was a original Nintendo with controllers, a power pad, a couple other accessories, and 16 games. But out of those 16 games, one of them happened to be a rare title for the NES called Panic Restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was actually really fun. We made it a point to play it, my brother and I and my wife, before we sold it. But I paid, what did I say, 80 for the lot, and I sold just that game for $550. So
wow.
Yeah, and that was just loose game, no box, no manual.
Yeah, though, I mean, the games are out there. The kind of market, as far as trying to find them, has dried up. I used to be into garage sales in the 90s, and I used to be able to go to any garage sale and they'd always have Nintendo games. Now, working even out of a thrift shop, we rarely get stuff donated. Even PlayStation 2s and stuff like that has pretty much dried up. You do have a great kind of method in kind of fishing for stuff. Do you want to talk about your Facebook ads and that? I think that's actually a genius idea.
Yeah. So what I'll do is the first step is joining different yard sale, flea market groups in your area. So, like for instance, my town has a specific one. There's actually like 3 tag sale groups or yard sale groups for just my town, and then I'll do all the surrounding towns within like half an hour drive of me. And what I did was there's a simple app. It's free. I have Android. I'm sure there's a similar one for iPhone, but it's just called Poster Maker. I use Poster Maker. I go in there and I throw up I make a little poster with bullet points of the items I'm looking for, and then throw a few pictures of like some action figures, a game system, like onto that poster. And then I'll start posting in the groups. This is what I'm looking for. I pay cash. I meet you in a safe area. And boom, I'll start it with like a caption. For instance, I'll just be like, hey, do you plan on having a tag sale soon? I can help you out. Instead of doing all that work, I'll buy all this stuff. Do you have items collecting dust in your attic, your basement, your garage, etc.? And the number of messages I get when I post those is pretty surprising. They work out very well for me.
Yeah, I'm going to actually start to do that. That's actually a really good idea. And as a matter of fact, when I was younger, there was a thing called the newspaper. Do you remember a thing called the newspaper?
Yes, I do. Honestly, I still like looking through the classified ads. There's certainly not nearly as many as there used to be, but every once in a while I'll come across something cool in the newspaper.
So exactly, yeah. So there used to be classified ads, and it would be the same exact thing where you'd put a classified ad in the back of a newspaper saying I buy old cars or I buy coins and baseball cards. That's what it was back in the day. No one was looking for retro games. They weren't even retro back in the day. It was literally just stuff that was out there. And it's pretty crazy to think how crazy the market has gone, literally thousands of dollars. And I cry myself to sleep every night thinking of all the stuff that I had that is gone, that could have put my kids through college and all that kind of stuff. So Poster Maker is actually a good tip, and I really appreciate that. For those that don't know, there's also handheld games. This is a Gameboy Color. Brandon talked a little bit about Game Boy, the little handheld things. Now there's a pretty crazy market for that. Not as crazy as Nintendo, but there's actually a lot of huge collectors that are into the handheld games. Those that don't know, Nintendo actually first started in the handheld market, and Brandon has one of those games. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I do. So before Nintendo started with their big consoles that you can buy hundreds of games for, they used to have these things called Game and Watch, and each one is a little tiny handheld that would be one specific game. So for instance, this one's Super Mario Brothers, and this came out in 1988 actually. So this is actually a later one. I want to say, was it like 83 they started coming out with the Game & Watch?
That sounds about right.
So there's a number of these. This specific one is the second version of Mario that they had. The first one is actually a little compact, so it's two-sided and it opens up, and there's 2 screens on it, I believe. But this specific one in working condition goes anywhere from like 80 to 100. And then if you have any of the inserts or the box, it just goes up from there.
Yeah. So some people that are watching this might not even know that Nintendo, before the consoles, had these kind of handheld games. If you can find some of the original ones sealed in their boxes, they actually came in kind of like these little square cardboard boxes. I haven't actually seen some of them recently. I think they were kind of almost plain looking. They may have had a little bit of information on the boxes. But Brandon's totally right. Finding those things is really hard to find actually now, but you never know. You might go to an estate sale, you might go to a garage sale and think that these are just kind of knockoffs or kind of weird kind of funky things, but those are actually before the NES came out, where these Game & Watch, and some of them go for a lot of money.
Yeah, oh man, I honestly forget the title, but I sold one of these. It was for like $350, $400, and it was like 5 years ago. I can't remember the title. It was complete with the box and inserts, but still, for that little thing, I believe I got it for like $10 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And not to kind of diss Sega or anything. Sega Genesis is out. Sega Master System was kind of like the equivalent of the NES. Do you have any Sega stuff to share with us, or no?
I did, and I totally forgot to grab it. What I have is it's called the Sega Nomad. So the Sega had the Game Gear, which was kind of like their Game Boy. It had little game cartridges, and that was pretty cool. But they also had something called the Sega Nomad, which is pretty rare. It's almost the same shape as a Game Gear. It's a little fatter. But what that does is it plays normal size Sega Genesis cartridges, and that thing is incredible. I love it.
Yeah.
I found that when Shop Goodwill first started doing their online auctions. That's where I got a Nomad from. I paid $60, including shipping, for it, and now in the condition that it's in, it's at least 150.
Yeah, let's kind of touch upon Shop Goodwill, because you actually bring up a good point. About 5 years ago is when that thing was really good. As a matter of fact, I didn't tell anyone about that a long time ago. It was basically one of the best kept secrets in reselling, was Shop Goodwill, because you were able to snipe lots. I talked about how I was able to find I made like maybe $1,000 on some Hot Wheels red lines that I sniped. Shop Goodwill, you could still find stuff on there. It's not as crazy as it was before, but it's actually a great place if you're looking to kind of do some lot sniping. You might actually pay up now, but one of the cool things is they actually sell collections of games without boxes, CDs and stuff like that you can have resurfaced. It's still a pretty good thing to look at. So if you're a video game collector, not necessarily a reseller, though, you might be able to find something there that does very well. But for the most part, if you're a video game collector and just want to buy the games in bulk for a good price, Shop Goodwill is still very valid.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it a couple of years ago. Or like you said, like 5 years ago or so. Yeah, no one around me at least really knew about it. So I definitely scored a good number of items. I want to say I haven't bought anything off of there in at least 2-3 years, but for a while it was really good. And there's definitely things to find still, but nowhere is near as good as it used to be.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is like I've been doing this for a long time, where I have niches I don't even talk about on these shows, and everyone's going to have their secret niches. If you still have stuff that you only know about, I go on Shop Goodwill. I do it all the time. I still buy stuff. I think I bought something last week. So if you have secret niches, things that you know about and you specialize in, go take a look. It's still a valid place to go look. Macari is another great place that I've been looking at stuff. The video game market on Macari is really good. And by the way, if you guys have extra Nintendo video game stuff, I've been doing very well on Macari. Have you tried Macari at all, or do you know about that shop?
I know about Mercari, but I've never used it. I stick to eBay and Facebook Marketplace for the most part for buying and selling.
Yeah, so I basically knew about Macari about a year ago, and it took me, I think I just started getting into it like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I've noticed that the video games sell very well. So just kind of a throwing it out there in case people are seeing slow sales on eBay, and you have a ton of video games, you're like, God, I've been sitting on these forever. Try Macari. Like I said, it's been very, very good for me. We had a question in the chat a minute ago about whether or not PlayStation 2 games and PlayStation 1 games were valid anymore. Oh, and huge shout out to Mary McQuain for the $5 super chat. She says, thanks for sharing, guys. This is always so much fun. I really appreciate that, Mary, for the $5 super chat. Your super chats are definitely appreciated for sure. So let's get back to the subject of PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. They basically are CD games. PlayStation 1, I think has a lot more rarer titles that are worth money. PlayStation 2, I usually tell people to stay away from PlayStation 2, but there's actually a lot of games, not a lot, but there's some good titles on PlayStation 2 that go over $50. So like I said, like Brandon and I said before earlier in the show, look up everything. Never not look something up.
Yeah, you always want to look it up. There's always obscure things, no matter if you're dealing with toys, games, clothing, whatever you're selling, there's always something obscure that you run the risk of passing right over if you don't look it up. While we're on the subject of PlayStation, this is something cool that a lot of people, I didn't find one until last year. And then this is always how this happens, but I ended up finding another one like a month later after I found the first one. But this is a smaller model of the PlayStation 1, but it has the LCD screen on it, like attachment. So that screen screws into the back of the console itself. And essentially it's just super portable and you can travel with it. I actually have a power converter in my car. So sometimes I hook up the original PlayStation in my car, like when we go on road trips and stuff like that on vacation. And such a cool little thing to have.
It is, and I went to a retro gaming expo maybe a couple years ago. I actually had a booth, and that system sells very well at the $80 price point. People were selling them at that. So that's another thing from Shop Goodwill that back in the day, you know, you'd look up PlayStation 1 lot and they would have a bunch of games and they'd have that. So it's one of those things where you'd buy that and you can still find those today, but that actually is really cool. I never owned one of those. But did it come with any extra attachments, or it was just that? It was just that system.
As far as I know, it was just
Yeah.
this. Yeah, I don't remember anything. They did have, I believe, one other style of screen that attached to it. It was like it was square or rectangle, not circle. And it kind of covered the whole front of the console when you put it down instead of the center there. But other than that, I'm pretty sure that was the only like main part.
Right. And so PlayStation 1 had a couple of iterations. They had the long square box that everyone knows about. They also had the PlayStation 1 Slim, and which is kind of like almost like that is. So the Slims are actually have kind of moved up in price. I guess I don't know if collectors, you know, prefer that over the older one, as like the older one, you know, is very clunky. And a lot of retro gamers like myself who have these cabinets, you can't fit like all that stuff into one cabinet. So having the slimmer versions. As far as PlayStation 2, all you need to do is just go to eBay, go to PlayStation 2 and search by the highest price. You can go to Worth Point. You can see what some of the hot games are. There's tons of great YouTube videos that actually will show you like the top 10 rarest games for any system. You can really go down a rabbit hole with that. And so PlayStation 2, like I said, I try to stay away from that. I'll tell you the one thing I stay away from: Xbox.
I agree for sure.
So Brandon's laughing because he probably knows. I mean, for the most part, okay, you could sell some Xbox stuff and make money, but from my experience, it's like it's long tail. It rarely sells. It doesn't sell as fast. There's so many problems with the machines. The games, like I said, don't sell very fast. Have you had any of that kind of experience selling Xbox stuff?
You want to know how many Xbox games I have? Original Xbox games?
Zero.
Zero. Zero, not one. Not in my collection, not for sale. I have had random ones once again from lots, but yeah, I don't recommend them.
But like we've been saying in this whole show, look everything up because
Yeah.
you never know what you're going to find. There's certain titles in every genre that are going to be worth some money. So definitely look them up. I will buy, if I find Xbox games that are sealed at Goodwill or whatever, I will scan them and look them up and see what they're going for. Amazon's actually a really good place to sell Xbox stuff. I feel like you get a little bit more, you can squeeze a little bit more of that dollar out on Amazon. Are you selling on Amazon by any chance?
I sold on Amazon for like a year. I just really prefer eBay right now, and I never got into FBA, which I feel like I probably should have, and I mean I probably still will at some point, because I always like those multiple income streams. But yeah, I was on Amazon for a year. We ended up going on vacation, so I put my store on a hold or whatever in vacation mode, and then I never really reactivated it after that. I just stuck with eBay.
Gotcha. But yeah, so I've had some pretty good experience with Amazon and Amazon FBA for any kind of video games. And by the way, you can sell retro video games through Amazon FBA. Usually all the games will have a listing. Someone created a listing. And so you can do it that way. Just make sure your games are tested. And as a pro tip, if you're going to be selling retro games on Amazon or Amazon FBA, especially merchant fulfilled, definitely take photos of them so that, you know, if you get a return, you're getting the right thing back. And that's another kind of thing we can get into real quick. There's some counterfeit games out there. Nintendo games are highly counterfeited. Pokemon, Game Boy games are highly counterfeited. And so there's lots of great videos on how to determine whether or not your game is a counterfeit. But like I said, you need a specialty screwdriver to unscrew these things right here. And usually when you look up the boards, you can see if whether or not they're counterfeits or not. For the pro tip for the NES games, if you look at the boards, and I wish I would brought the thing, if you see little globs of black on your boards, it's usually determined. There's also a gold Nintendo thing that comes across the actual board. So have you came across anything like that before?
I've come across a lot of counterfeit Game Boy Advance Pokemon games. Other than that, I haven't really had to deal with too many bootleg items. But as far as the Game Boy Advance games go, there's a few things that give it away. It's mostly like the Pokemon Emerald and Fire Red, the ones that are like colored Sapphire. There's a few things that usually tell you that it's fake. The tiny Nintendo seal right here, like the Nintendo seal of approval or whatever. A lot of the fake ones I've seen, it's very blurry. Like you can almost not even read what it says. Another thing is where you probably can't see it great on camera, but up top in this dark gray plastic, Game Boy Advance is kind of like stamped into it. A lot of the fake ones, the font will just look weird. You can just tell they're cheaply made, and that's how you tell that these are fake for the most part, at least in my experience.
Right. And you're totally right about the stamps, and kind of also sometimes words are spelled wrong.
Yep.
Those are kind of obvious ones, but the Game Boy games, the Pokemon ones they've done a really good job in the counterfeiting one, especially the Sapphire one that you're talking about, or the Emerald one that has a clear plastic.
Yep.
That one is probably one of the most counterfeited one, other than the original Game Boy ones too. And so what we're saying is basically, you know, don't take anything for face value. Do your research. There's a lot of people that scam other people when it comes to retro games. Like I said, if you do come across a rare game, open it up if you can. Make sure that, you know, the insides. That was freaking loud.
I don't know what that was.
What's that?
I said I don't even know what that was. I don't know what that sound came from.
I don't even know where that came from either. So we're going to open up the room for some questions. If you do have some questions, type in 1 in the chat right now. And if you do have questions, or we'll keep rambling on about what to look for and things like that. So if you have a question, type in 1 and then type in the question, and we'll get to your questions if you have any questions. But we're gonna sidetrack the show a little bit to let you know that there are other games out there, like the Panasonic 3DO. There's also the TurboGrafx 16, which was a super hot system when I was younger, when I was a teenager. TurboGrafx 16, actually, instead of a game or a CD, it had this little card that was pretty much like a credit card that went inside the game. It's very thin, as you can see here. And the game data is basically held in this little chip here, these little pieces of plastic. TurboGrafx 16, just like the Sega CD, is something that you buy no matter what. I think the lowest end games go for like $10. So if you can get a whole collection of these TurboGrafx 16, they come in these CD things. A lot of people threw away these boxes So if you can find ones that have the CD, the little card, and the instructions with the box, those demand big time money. Did you ever own the TurboGrafx 16 or the 3DO, the Panasonic?
I've never owned any of those. I've never owned the Atari Jaguar. There's a couple other random ones. But yeah, they're super hard to come by, which is obviously why you're saying to buy them whenever you see them. The only one that's more rare that I've had is Nintendo, but it's the Virtual Boy, and the games are similar to those. They're like little cards. The system is horrible to play. It gives you a headache, at least me. But there's still some high dollar little game cards to be had for that system as well.
Do you actually have one of those to show? I'm not sure exactly if you had one of those for share and tell tonight.
It is actually up in the office at my family's business right now.
No problem.
I thought I had it here because I had recently posted on Instagram about it, but for some reason it made its way there.
So Marrakech7 asked, do you go outside of Connecticut to source your games?
Personally, I do not usually. I mean, if I find a good deal that might be like in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, somewhere that's fairly close to me, it has to be good though, like a lot. I'm not going to drive out for one item or anything crazy like that. That, and if I'm on vacation, I always stop at random thrift stores and stuff like that when I'm on vacation. So those would be the only times I would source outside of Connecticut, really.
Right. Yeah. And for myself, I think I don't really do much sourcing other than online arbitrage. As far as going outside of where I'm at, I don't go drive to, another state to go look for stuff or anything like that. But online arbitrage is still a very valid place to go look for games. Brandon's tip about using, Facebook, kind of not Facebook ads, but kind of like what would you call that?
They're Facebook groups. So
okay,
like different yard sale groups, and then I post a want ad in the groups.
Yeah, so like that kind of stuff is very valid. I mean, technically, I guess you could run a Facebook ad and do that kind of stuff for sure. We got Texas Gal Treasures in the house. She said she knows zero about games for sure. She's an awesome person, Margaret. She's got a great channel for sure. And definitely go and check her out if you're into jewelry and stuff like that. I'm going to post a link to Brandon's channel also. Definitely go and check him out. Trying to see if we have any more questions. Did you have anything you wanted to share before we wrap this up?
I mean, I could go in a little deeper on. I know when we were talking about handhelds, we kind of just stopped after the Game & Watch, okay. But I kind of have their whole Nintendo history. We got the original Game Boy. I played this for hours as a kid. My grandmother is actually the one who had one. So every time I went over grandma's house, original Game Boy is what I would play. A lot of Dr. Mario and a lot of Tetris was played on this.
Oh yeah, Tetris is I think Tetris was the game that actually came with the system, correct?
Yeah, there was. I think most of them did come with Tetris. Yep.
Yeah, and that's you actually have a really mint condition box there. I thought, is it in a plastic or is it just?
It's not in a plastic, no.
Oh,
but it's nice, yeah.
Yeah, and another thing is finding the stuff with the boxes definitely adds value.
As the proof of purchase, so it was bought 10/9/93. It's written on the back there.
Dude, that is insane.
Yeah,
cool.
Pretty crazy.
And like I said, certain collectors might actually find that intriguing and add a little bit of value to the actual thing. And you're right. Did you have other handhelds that you wanted to show?
I have so many. Here's a teal Game Boy Color, complete in the box.
And I have that same exact one right here.
And there's a lime green one. I didn't bring down a Game Boy Pocket, but that's one that is slightly even skinnier than the Game Boy Color and a little shorter. There you go. What else? I have.
For those who don't know, Game Boy Color was a little bit of an upgrade to the regular Game Boy, where it was just basically black and white, I want to say. Game Boy Color actually had a few more colors in it. I want to say like maybe it was like 8 colors or something like that. And the games kind of look different too. They kind of have these weird little clear games in there for sure. And it looks like you got is that a DS?
No, I have the regular Game Boy Advance.
Oh, Advance. Yeah, we skipped one.
Which plays these. These are Game Boy Advance games. They're skinnier than your original Game Boy games. And then
the Game Boy Advance also was full color, just like
yep.
a normal console, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, once they hit after the Game Boy, all their little handhelds started being full color, which is cool. A couple Game Boy Advance SPs, so these are the ones that would close into little compacts.
Right.
And the cool thing about these is on the back there's a serial or a model number. There's AGS001, which is both of these. The Game Boy Advance is backlit, so if you hit this little button, it lights up the screen a little more. So if you don't know, the Game Boys before that, you would have to attach little lights to the side. I had what was called a snake light. It had like a snake head on the end, and it would light it up because at night, if you're in your bed when you're supposed to be sleeping and you want to get some Game Boy time in, you couldn't play in the dark or in the car at night. So these, the 001 is backlit, but then they made an AGS 101, and that has a super backlit screen. So the price difference in those is I sell these, depending on the time of year, I sell the 001 for about 40, 60, 60 on a good day. And then the brighter one, I usually sell for no less than 80.
Yeah. So that's a pro tip for those that are out there who are also lot sniping. Brandon actually brings a good point of knowing exactly what system's what. That, like he said, that's a difference of like 40, 50 bucks right there. And you actually bring up a really good point. So thank you for talking about that for sure.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
And so was that it for the handhelds that you had, or?
Handhelds themselves, yes. I have a couple. I know I showed red earlier, but I have red and blue complete in box. I'm a huge Pokemon fan. I'm a nerd. I played when Pokemon Go came out. I was playing it nonstop, walking around my town, going to all the gyms and stuff. But this is probably the game that I've spent the most time on total, like in my life. I loved this game. When it first came out, I stayed up for hours playing this game.
I played that game a lot too when it came out, and all I could think is like, like that's like, it's like ingrained in my mind. I think I had was there? Oh no, those were the 2 original ones. That's right. And the yellow one, the Pokemon one, came out after that. But yeah, that was an incredible game, and it's crazy to think that sealed one of those go for anywhere between $300 to $500 now. And those things were like, they made millions of those things.
Yeah, I've seen, I think the most expensive one I've seen was graded, and I think it sold for like 800 or so.
Yeah, but that sounds totally about right. Did you have any other stuff that you wanted to show? Because I saw you kind of panned over before the show, and I swear there was like a million things in front of a fireplace.
Yeah, I have all sorts of stuff, man. I have a.
Oh yeah, there it is.
NES Action Set. So it's the original Nintendo with the gun and the Mario and Duck Hunt combo game. This one is very nice. It's totally complete in box, styrofoam, every single piece of paperwork.
Yeah, me and my brother broke the styrofoam on our original one like the second we got it. So the styrofoam is the thing that is like the hardest to have in mint condition.
Exactly. Yeah, but it has everything. The manual for the game, this thing is nice. And this is all the stuff that people don't usually have, is the manual for the zapper, the manual for the system itself. That's just an advertisement card. And then a big old Nintendo poster. I'm not going to unfold the whole thing because you can't see it all anyways. And then, I almost never see, is the Nintendo Entertainment System Important Warranty and Registration Information booklet.
Oh, that's right.
So it has absolutely everything.
Yeah, that is crazy. I was just thinking about, when you showed that manual, the little instruction booklets. I call it manual. They're little instruction booklets. Yeah, right there. Some of those a long time ago, I used to buy collections of for like less than $1 a piece, and even instructions are going for crazy. There's a Clay Fighter 64, and let me actually share my screen. This is the first time I'm ever going to share a screen on Facebook Live, so I'm pretty sure this is going to go horribly wrong.
Is it the Sculptor's Cut edition?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to show that right now. As we could see here, hopefully everyone can see. Let me see if I could do present to everyone. As you can see here, there's a Clay Fighter, $1,300. It was a Blockbuster exclusive. Now I went to look at this because there was an instruction booklet that sold for like $700 alone, because basically Blockbuster would throw out the box and the game. As a matter of fact, I think does it have the game in here? Maybe, but the instruction booklet, instruction booklet goes for easily $600, and the box could probably go for another couple $100. So the main point is saying, like, the games sometimes are worth a lot of money, but even some of the rarer games, finding the boxes and the instruction manual is incredibly hard to find too. Wow, I guess that screen sharing thing actually does work.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
For sure. Let me see if I can put, I'm going to put your name in here for sure. Again, we're getting to the top of the hour. If anyone doesn't have any questions, let's see here. Actually, Blaine in game just actually brought up a good point about the NES Top Loader. I totally forgot about that.
I do. I have one. It's buried somewhere. The NES Top Loader was cool. It was the second model they came out with of the NES. And instead of putting the games in sideways and having to press them down, and the annoying thing about that was if the clip wore out or broke, you'd have to like fold up cardboard and jam it in there on top of the game to keep it held down so you could get it to work. But with the Top Loader, it's literally self-explanatory. The console's flat and the game would just load in the top like the N64 or the Sega Genesis. They still used the same cartridges. They would just go in differently, and it was much more efficient, at least in my opinion. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I remember those actually, maybe like 10 years ago, they were going for a lot of money. The prices cooled down. I mean, they still go for I think you can find one for like $80 to $100. I remember when they were like $200, and they had the dog bone. They called the dog bone controller.
Yep.
And which was it wasn't like the Square NES controller, but it was actually called the dog bone controller. And those still, just controllers alone. And by the way, we can actually sidetrack this a little bit, saying that, the controllers, there's some rare controllers that are out there that are worth a ton of money for sure.
So, yeah, I'd say as far as controllers go, one to look out for is, it's a system that we said was right on the cusp of being retro. That's the GameCube. And the controllers you want to look out for that are the wireless ones. They're called Wavebird controllers. And if you can find those wireless controllers with the little the receiver that plugs into the system itself, you're looking at a good at least $60 for a controller.
Yeah, and that actually brings up a good point about even the Nintendo 64 controllers still go for a good amount of money. And I find Goodwill. I find Nintendo 64 controllers at the Goodwill all the time. It's actually kind of crazy. I don't know if they fall from the sky and just end up into Goodwill, but yeah, it seems that. So we're going to take one more question. We want to respect Brandon's time. He's got a new baby and all that kind of fun stuff. So congratulations also, Brandon, on your new baby. And I'm very excited for you, and awesome.
Thank you, man. It's already been a roller coaster. It's incredible and exhausting at the same time, but
yeah, for sure. It's definitely worth it. So our last question, Dylan Patrick asked, do you guys ever source at GameStop to resell? What are your thoughts on that?
I have not. The only thing that I've probably bought at GameStop and resold were certain Funko Pops, like exclusives. But I know that's not really what he's talking about. They do have some good clearance tables and whatnot, but no, I haven't really flipped anything from there besides Pops.
Yeah, Dylan Patrick says that sometimes they have good clearance on board games and figures. I'll go check that out. They have one in a mall. They actually have two of them in my city. I haven't gone a lot because their prices are really overpriced. And there's a kind of like funny memes where you go and turn in like $1,000 Nintendo game and get like 30 cents for it. So
yeah. That's accurate.
Yeah, so I kind of stay away from GameStop. My son, who's 14, he loves GameStop, and I don't know what it is with the younger generation, but they love GameStop. I don't know what it is for sure. Yeah, so go ahead.
I miss Funko Land.
Say that again.
I miss Funko Land. I said.
Oh, I don't even. What is that? I've heard of that. What is that?
Funko Land was essentially GameStop before it was GameStop. So it was when I was younger. So it was all retro games, but it was the same type of deal. You could trade in or buy, sell, buy, whatever.
So Mountain Adventure, the thoughts on the Atari system. We talked about the Atari system earlier. It hasn't really demanded much. There's some rare games that go for a lot of money, but for the most part, it's few and far between. It's one of those systems that really kind of didn't really take off. It kind of did a little bit in the very beginning. As a matter of fact, I got a funny story to tell real quick before we go. Is the very first video game I ever played was Atari, and it was E.T., the worst game in the world, supposedly. And I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I still remember playing it to this day. And I remember being that young and thinking, this game is so hard, I couldn't figure it out. But then years later, figure out that the game was so horrible. It wasn't me just being 3 or 4 not figuring out. It was just the game itself was complete garbage.
Yeah, E.T.'s terrible. Terrible game.
There's actually a great documentary for any that wants to watch about the ET, and they kind of threw him away in a dumpster, not a dumpster. What do you call it? A landfill. And there's a whole thing in there. But anyways, Brandon, I really appreciate you stopping by. Do you have any last words? And definitely everyone go and check out his channel, which I'm going to link again right here. Let's get him some views. He does some really cool haul videos. So Brandon, do you have any last words before we cut this off?
I mean, I think we covered quite a bit. I'm very happy with the show. I appreciate you having me on. If you couldn't tell, I love talking about this stuff. So I feel like there'll probably be a part 2 in our future, or maybe we'll get into some vintage toys and other stuff. I could go on for days.
Yeah, me too, man. Trust me. I think we really just scratched the surface here on a lot of the stuff that we're into. So definitely go and check out Brandon's channel below. Definitely click the like button. And if you're not subscribed to any of us, definitely go down there, click the subscribe button. Thank you to Mary McQuan, Rosina N for moderating the chat. I really appreciate everyone definitely tuning in. Have a good night and good sales, and we'll see you next time. Take care.